Welcome to the Tea Coffee Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Matthew.
I'm Jacob.
And today we're going to go over week one, just the reactions to games. It certainly was a wild week.
Yeah, and we're re-recording this because we forgot to record the first couple games, but anyway.
Yeah, first game, Chiefs, Texans, and Thursday Night Football. Mahomes was great as always, but Hilaire, he had a great rookie debut. What do you think of it?
That game really changed my perception on Edwards-Helaire. I thought he'd be more used as a 15-carry a game, 5-catch a game type of back, but they showed that they're really going to use him as a workhorse. Workhorse not necessarily in the traditional sense, but more like a shotgun running team. And I would expect those two targets to increase because Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes have got to know that Edwards-Helaire is a really good receiving back too.
Mm-hmm. And then just going on the depth chart, are you worried about Tyreek Hill? He only had 14 fantasy points, and that was because of his one touchdown.
I still think Tyreek Hill. I'm not worried about Tyreek Hill. He might have these games occasionally, but he'll also make up for it with 8-catch, 200-yard, 3-touchdown games.
Mm-hmm. And on the Texans side, Will Fuller, he went off 8 receptions, 112 yards, by far Watson's favorite target. 10 targets compared to 5 from Cooks.
Yeah, I think Fuller is their number one. The question is, can he please stay healthy? Because 2017 he played 10 games, 2018 he played 7, 2019 he played 11, and he in his previous 4 seasons as a pro, he has not finished as the wide receiver 50. He's not finished higher than wide receiver 50 in PPR format. That's due to injury, but still, that's a little bit of a concern.
And then I guess the final flip, I can't even talk. The final pleasant supply was David Johnson. 19 fantasy points. It's nice to see him back. I think he's going to be a good RB2 flex option.
Yeah, he definitely looked like he was back. And I'm sure that Houston might even force feed him at times to make up for the DeAndre Hopkins debacle. But he is, say whatever you want about the Hopkins trade, but David Johnson is still a decent fit in that spread offense.
Mm-hmm. Next game, you're happy about it. Packers-Vikings.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on it?
I'm sorry for doubting you, Aaron Rodgers. I say it as a Packer fan, and he looked like he was really getting aggressive out there. Even when they were up by 2 scores, he was still bombing it. And because in my opinion, Rodgers wasn't aggressive enough the past couple seasons. He only threw 6 picks in his last 32 games, which, don't get me wrong, that's absolutely phenomenal, but I would like to see more risk-taking. I saw that today. He and Devontae Adams absolutely exploited those young corners.
There was also Scantling had 96 yards. Do you think Rodgers can keep that production up to his wide receivers 2 and 3s, or is that just a good product of a good game?
I think that's more of a product of a good game. Scantling is not consistent at all. There will probably be 4 games this season where he has 0 fantasy points. And there might be games where I could see him having a 30-point game, honestly. But he could have had 30 this game because he dropped a 60-yard touchdown.
Oh, wow.
And right when I was thinking he had turned a corner, he has 2 really bad drops in a row, and I'm just pulling my hair out.
Mm-hmm. And then the Seahawks-Falcons game. That was just, if you had a player from that game, most likely you ended up being happy.
Yeah. What about the Vikings, though?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. Cook did good. Cousins did good. Thielen, I'm pleasantly surprised by 6 receptions for 111 yards. Jefferson kind of worries me. He only had 1 catch, I believe.
Jefferson's a player I'd more keep an eye on at this point, just on the waiver wire. And if he looks like he's trending up, I'd pick him up.
Oh, shit, I was gonna say. Seahawks game, yeah. I was surprised by Wilson. They finally let him throw the ball more. And he responded with 31 for 35, 322 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So, like, he went off, but that comes at the expense of Chris Carson. Even though he scored 20-plus points, that was due to the 2 touchdowns. And he had less carries in reality than Carlos Hyde. So he's someone that I'm going to sell early, or try to sell after his great week.
I would try to sell Chris Carson too, if I'm being honest. And Chris Carson, that some of that stuff is not 2 receiving touchdowns. He's not a receiving back. He rarely does that. And the Seahawks have shown that they're finally going to let Russ cook. They're not going to give Chris Carson the ball 15 to 20 times. And if anything, it's going to be a split between him and Carlos Hyde. So I would be really scared if I were a Chris Carson owner.
And then on the Falcon side, Matt Ryan, he went off. He supported 3 100-yard receivers, Julio at 157, Ridley at 130, and Gage at 114. Do you think that's something that can continue?
For the top 2, absolutely. I wouldn't necessarily expect Russell Gage to repeat his performance. He was just a 6th-round pick in 2018, but who knows? Maybe he could be the next great Falcons receiver, because the Falcons really draft and develop these receivers. And Calvin Ridley, okay, I had him as my wide receiver 12 to start the season. He was one of my draft crushes in the offseason, and he went off. I mean, he's not going to catch 2 touchdowns every week, but you see him basically splitting targets with Julio.
It's nice to see that both of them can coexist together. They both had over 130 yards receptions.
Yeah, this offense is just so pass happy. It can easily support 2 top 10 fantasy options at receiver.
And Gurley didn't do all that bad. He had like 13, 14 points.
Yeah, and Gurley, there's no competition really in the Falcons backfield, but the thing is they won't run the ball a lot. I believe he's almost a better athlete than Austin Hooper, and Austin Hooper was the number 1 tight end in fantasy last season before he got hurt. So I still do believe in Hayden Hurst to produce. I think he'll maybe get some of those targets that Russell Gage got, and he can rise back up to maybe 10, 15 points.
What game is next?
How about the Jets and the Bills?
Ooh, man. You want to start on that?
Okay. I had Kyler Murray in every single one of my leagues except for one where I had Josh Allen. And Josh Allen was pretty amazing. Like, wow.
And he could have done better, because there's a wide open touchdown in the end zone he overthrew. So that's another 6 points. And like, he still torched them both on the ground, where he was the leading rusher, and then in the air. So like, people are forgetting that Allen was QB6 last year, and he's not disappointing at all. Like, granted, this is the Jets, but he's still lighting them up.
Yeah, and I really like how the Bills have been spreading the ball around. Diggs got 9 targets. John Brown got 10. Cole Beasley, their slot receiver, got 7. And Josh Allen was an absolute stud this week, and I would really expect that to continue. One thing I am concerned about, though, is the Bills' backfield, because it wasn't all that pretty.
Yeah, Bell I believe he got injured. He's out. Let me look up what his injury is, but I know he's out for next week for sure. Yeah, Gase said Bell could be out for a couple weeks. So, like, it's rough.
Yeah.
Gordon do too good, but someone who you could add maybe in a deeper league is Josh Adams. He could take over the backfield maybe.
Potentially. I see him as a relief pitcher for Frank Gore, but if Le'Veon Bell's out for the next couple weeks, Adams is worth a pickup, if for nothing else other than depth, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And then on the Buffalo side, what do you think of Zach Moss's debut?
It was a little bit rough. He kind of got bailed out by a receiving touchdown, but I think it's tough to tell if the Jets actually have a good run defense or just what's going on in that backfield because neither of them did all that. Neither Singletary
only had
nor
1.2 yards per carry, and Singletary only had 3.3.
that is a little concerning. I think Singletary still has value as a receiver out of the backfield. He had 5 catches this week. I still think that could continue. The Bills do like to spread the ball around.
And then I guess the last thing about this game, Jamison Crowder, he went off. He had 7 receptions, 115 yards, and 1 touchdown. Do you think this is a fluke, or do you think this is something that's going to continue?
I think he'll still get the targets, being Darnold's wide receiver 1. He got 13 targets on Darnold's 35 pass attempts. Most of that production came from a 69-yard touchdown he broke away, which was 12.9 fantasy points. No, 13.9, excuse me.
PPR.
But I would still expect that to I'd still expect it to be good.
13 targets, which is a lot of targets.
Yeah, and the Jets just don't have a lot of other weapons. Rashad Perriman still isn't living up to his first-round pedigree. Le'Veon got hurt, and yeah, that's about it.
What game is next?
Hang on. How about the NFC North matchup, Bears and Lions?
Okay, first of all, I want to preface this by saying, what did DeAndre Swift do? He could have won the game. He dropped a wide open touchdown. I was speechless when that happened.
I was I was speechless too. Right when the Packers Vikings game ended, they turned on the Bears Lions game. And a couple plays into watching it is the Swift drop. And my heart just stopped. I had Swift on my bench in a couple of my leagues. I wasn't starting him in any of them, so it wasn't like fantasy related, but just, oh my goodness. What? I mean, that's just another day in the life of Matthew Stafford, though.
But I know. I think the only really relevant thing in this game is Adrian Peterson. He was by far the lead back. He had 14 carries compared to Swift's 3 carries and Johnson's 7 carries, and he had 93 yards. And the other Johnson had 14 and Swift only had 8.
Yeah, this Detroit backfield, though, I think I would almost stay away from because Adrian Peterson really complicated things. They showed they were going to give him the ball instead of Johnson or Swift, and but who knows if maybe don't be too hasty to pick up Adrian Peterson because who knows, Garron Johnson could break out. I could see that. It looks like they're going to do a committee like they do in New England.
Dave Montgomery, what did you think of him?
I thought he was fine, I guess, as RB3. Got 13 carries, 64 yards, and caught a pass for 10. Cohen got 7 carries, which is a little more than I would expect from him, but I wouldn't necessarily expect that to repeat. I would see Cohen more as a 4 to 6 carry per week player, but I still think David Montgomery will be the workhorse back. And keep in mind, the Bears fell behind. I mean, they came back and won, but once they fell behind, they weren't really able to run the ball much with David Montgomery.
Mitchell Trubisky, though, he finishes the QB5. Fluke or not? I'm not saying he's going to be that good, but do you think he's not the worst quarterback in the league, as we're all saying? Because in the fourth quarter, he was good.
I still think he's maybe the 30th best quarterback in the league.
Who's below?
Ballpark. Sorry, what?
Who's below him?
Jeez, let me think of teams. You can think about Fitzpatrick on the Dolphins, and
Baker, honestly.
I don't know about. Well, I still think we need more than a one game sample size for that. I Mitchell have these flashes of greatness because don't get me wrong, he's really talented, but I don't trust to see it on a consistent basis. And keep in mind, the Lions secondary is also not very good.
That's true. Did you off note? But did you see that pass he had to Anthony Miller?
That was a dot, but we've
Yeah, that was insane. But yeah, next game. What game do you want to do?
uh, how about well speaking of Fitzpatrick, the Dolphins Patriots.
Oh yeah, I
Oh
was
man.
pleasantly surprised by Cam. Props to Belichick. He basically changed their entire offense to tailor Cam Newton, and he felt right at home.
Yeah. Cam Newton and Josh McDaniels just look like they were having fun, like on the sideline. And Cam looks like he's almost back healthy to what we saw at the start of 2018. And if you have Cam in a fantasy league where you have a chance to pick him up, I'd say go do it because he looked healthy to me. He was willing to run, take hits, which he wasn't so willing to do the start of last season when he was still hurt. And I think I think Cam is. I really think Cam is back.
Mm-hmm. He passing wise, he didn't have the best game, but he got his points rushing, 15 carries for 75 yards. But then the only kind of worrying thing is he had 2 rushing touchdowns, so like those might not be a given. But to see that he's still rushing, it's great. He could be top 15, maybe even top 10.
That's true. My biggest concern with Cam as a fantasy option at this point are just the receivers because there's still Edelman still plays in the slot, but the second best outside receiver is N'Keal Harry, and then
They don't have a wide receiver 3 at all.
no, they don't.
Oh god, yeah, it's rough for Cam. Prayers up.
Yeah, yeah.
Miami's running back core. It's terrible. Nothing else to say. How didn't even average a yard per carry.
That Miami, I think, will also be a running back by committee. Same with New England because Sony Michel had 10 carries, Rex Burkhead had 7, and so yeah, Miami's a running back by committee. They're still starting Fitzpatrick. I would be intrigued by Preston Williams, who had 2 catches for 41 yards on 7 targets. So
Yeah, this was just. I remember that before his injury, Preston Williams was actually outscoring Devontae Parker.
yeah, and he's kind of a similar receiver to Devontae Parker, where you watch Preston Williams, he is really talented, and I mean, if he can stay healthy, I think uh really he's a really deep sleeper. I like him as a wide receiver 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm. So Fitzpatrick didn't do too good. When, in your opinion, is Tua time?
If I had to guess now, I'd say week 4. Let me check their schedule just to see when the best chance would be to put him in. They play the Bills next week. They play at the Jags. Then week 4 they play the Seahawks, so maybe not.
That's it. Ooh.
Yeah, it's a rough schedule. They might actually put him in. Whatever week is that? Whenever they play the Chargers.
Week 7.
I could see that because I could see that's the first semi-easy game they have on their schedule since after Jacksonville. And who knows, maybe the Chargers will be 2-5 and they'll put in Justin Herbert too. So it'll be a battle of the rookie quarterbacks.
Yeah. So next game is the Eagles. Eagles football team. And that was a choke job of none other.
Oh
How do you let that happen?
Okay. Is Doug Peterson bad now? I don't understand what happened.
Yeah,
because
like went off. How?
I had Wentz in 1 or 2 leagues, and I benched him for Kyler.
Oh yeah,
and for the first quarter and a half, I was kicking myself, and then Kyler just proved out to be the better option all along.
I guess one thing to note is that Peyton Barber, even though he only averaged 1.7 yards per carry, he had 2 rushing touchdowns. So I'm pretty sure he was third in the NFL in goal line carries. So that's something to note. In a deeper leagues, you can maybe pick him up for a touchdown as like a boom or bust player.
Yeah, I think Gibson is still worth a shot. He was really hyped up in the week or two leading up to the season, and I still think I think he is a viable fantasy option, but it does concern me a little bit that Peyton Barber had 17 carries while he only had 9.
I don't know when people were saying like, "Oh, Antonio Gibson's as good as Cam Akers or David Montgomery," and I'm like, stop hyping him up. He's the third string running back, or he was the third string running back.
Yeah, and then Geis decided to be a terrible person off the field, and then they let Adrian Peterson go.
Raiders game. That was a good game to watch. Raiders Panthers 34-30. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Josh Jacobs. In my main league, he scored 3 touchdowns for me, and it looks like he's going to get the full workload again this season. And I'm also encouraged that he got 4 catches on 6 targets. So
yeah, he was second in on the
team.
It's
like they will be involving him more in the passing game.
Yeah, Jacobs, he went off. If he was on your fantasy team, congrats. That performance isn't sustainable just because the odds of getting 3 touchdowns again. That doesn't happen. But like, sell high if you have the chance.
Yeah, and yeah, Jacobs won't get 3 touchdowns every week, obviously, but I would expect the 4 catches to repeat because he had actually the second most targets on the entire team. Waller had 8, Jacobs had 6, and Ruggs had 5, and Derek Carr threw the ball 30 times.
Mm-hmm. You could maybe flip Jacobs for like Mixon if the Mixon's owner is pretty scared.
Yeah, spoiler alert. I loved Mixon before this season. We can talk about him in a minute, but looking to the Panthers, CMC,
as always,
as per usual.
Robbie Anderson surprised.
Yeah, I thought DJ Moore would have a better game. I thought DJ Moore would basically have Robbie Anderson's game. DJ Moore caught 4 balls on 9 targets.
Are you worried about that at all, or?
I'd honestly expect if he gets 9 targets again next week, I'd expect him to catch 6. I thought he'd maybe pair a little better with Teddy just in the short game, but I still would expect that from him in the coming weeks.
I guess going back to the Raiders side, someone who I was really excited about was Bryan Edwards, and then he proceeds to drop 1.9. No, I can't even talk. 1.9 points on me. So that was just really disappointing as a fan of his.
I think with rookie receivers, they'll take time. Maybe he won't be amazing for the first month of the season, but if he has like a good game, then I really think he could make a huge impact.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this game now. Colts Jaguars.
Oh man. The Jags
mania continues. He is refusing to he's refusing to tank, period.
Yeah, I don't think he wants Trevor Lawrence spoiling his fun.
He had a 95% completion, which is just insane.
Yeah, Gardner Minshew, it's still going somehow, and wow. But my biggest takeaways were from the Colts side of things. Oh man, and with Marlon Mack potentially out for the year.
Yeah, it was confirmed. He just tore his ACL.
Let me see, 8 hours ago. Oh my goodness. So
he
and okay, so if you have Jonathan Taylor on your fantasy team, congratulations. Just start him immediately.
Yeah, the only reason why we had Taylor so low, or everyone had Taylor so low, was just because Mac was in the picture. But now it's like week 1, way earlier than anyone could expect. This is Taylor's backfield, basically.
Yeah, I thought he would gradually take it over the course of the season, but Mac got hurt, and now Taylor's the guy. And this is why I'm fully aboard the Taylor hype train now. 6 catches. At Wisconsin,
Targets too.
yeah, at Wisconsin, he only caught. Well, I think he only caught. He didn't even catch 20 balls in his final season, and maybe that could be due to the fact that Wisconsin didn't have a great quarterback. But
Who is their quarterback? Cone?
Jack Cohn, but with Taylor, Rivers has a tendency to check down to his running backs in the flat a lot. And if Taylor's getting those 6 targets, I expect him to get 5 targets next week. I really would. And if he has that receiving upside as well as the rushing upside, just because he's so talented, just start him.
Rushing upside though, he ran 9 carries for 22 yards, which like it really isn't that much. So would you be worried, or is that just rookie growing pains against a surprising defense?
I still think it's rookie growing pains. I think I'd imagine he's going to do better on the ground next week once he gets the workload of 15, I would say, carries. They might still try to protect him with Nyheim Hines.
Yeah,
but I think Taylor will just emerge.
Great game. 31 points. He had the same amount of carries, I believe. He had more early. Yeah, he had 7 carries. So, like, previously we thought he would only be in the receiving game, but now with Mack out, he could be a minority factor in the rushing game, too.
Yeah, so Nyheim Hines would actually be a pretty good handcuff to Taylor while he's also getting those targets in the receiving game. And with Rivers preferring to throw to his running backs in the flat between Taylor and Mack and Nyheim Hines, they combined for a total of 17 targets out of 46 for Philip Rivers.
Yeah, Hines he led the team in targets.
Yeah.
On the Jacksonville side, what do you think about James Robinson?
I think I wasn't able to watch much of this game, but he looks like their lead back. He's the only running back who actually got carries. So I think he's basically. I think he's worth a pickup now at this point.
Do you think he's worth a start, or is that way too early at this point?
A little too early. I wouldn't, given that there's no competition in the backfield at this point, as shown in week 1, I'd be fine with starting him if one of my starters goes down.
Okay, this is going to be a big game. Browns-Ravens.
My gosh. Do we have to talk about the Browns? Actually, never mind. I do want to talk about the Browns. Good Lord.
All right, where do we start?
First of all, thanks a lot, Nick Chubb. You got me less than 5 fantasy points. Once you fell behind, there was just no need to involve him in the game plan. So, thanks a lot.
Are you? I guess Chubb obviously had a really bad game. Are you concerned about him at all?
Yes. And in the first quarter, he had already 40 rushing yards, and he was looking like himself. And I'm like, oh, and he already had a catch for 6 yards. So I'm like, okay, he's going to have a good game. He proceeds to get me negative points for the last 45 minutes of the game. He got 18 rushing yards and then fumbled. So, yeah. And with Kareem Hunt getting more carries, I understand that the Browns were down, but that would scare me.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be too worried about Chubb just because they played one of the best defenses in the league, but it's definitely something to monitor.
My concern with Chubb is not the talent. The talent is there. I still think he's the best back on the team, but is he not going to get the workload? Does the new head coach, Kevin Stefanski, not like him as much as Kareem Hunt?
Baker, he's ass. He's terrible. He's bad.
Yeah, Baker. I was even a little optimistic for him heading into the season. He had said the right things. He'd said he was gonna put his head down a little bit, but this was just not a good performance to say the least.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, Cleveland, you're in for another rough year, another
And
rough
then
10 years. We feel for you.
I guess on the receiving yard, Jarvis Landry had a great game by his standards. He was hurt, but he still had 5 receptions for 61 yards. But then Odell Beckham Jr. He 10 targets, yet only 3 catches. How?
Yeah,
Like, I'm worried about him.
yeah, and most of the offseason, I flirted with moving Ridley and OBJ. I had Ridley as my wide receiver 12 and OBJ as my wide receiver 13. I really thought about flipping them just because Odell's more of a proven commodity. He's a top 10 receiver in the league when he's healthy. And then eventually I did remember who was throwing them passes.
Yeah, but I think part of the problem's on Odell.
Yeah, and with I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't like know Odell obviously, but I could see him asking for a trade, which I mean, who can
I
blame him?
think he mouthed to Lamar, come trade for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he'd love to be a part of that offense. Which let's shift over to Baltimore,
Yeah,
and
but Lamar, he's gotten even better. His passing skills, they were amazing. I think that pass. Do you see that his pass? I think it was Miles Boykin.
yeah,
That was a
or was that Marquise Brown? But anyway, Lamar looks. I was worried a little bit about some regression, but he looked really sharp
mhm.
this week. My only concern with him with fantasy is that 7 carries, 45 rushing yards. So it looks like the Ravens are rightfully so trying to keep a little more healthy for January. So
I mean, that could be because they were winning so much they didn't want to hurt him.
yeah, that's true. But that might be the case in a lot of the games that the Ravens play this season. So I mean, if they're up 20-0 in the second quarter and Lamar only has 20 rushing yards, he's probably not going to get any more.
Sure. Next game. Chargers Bengals. Joe Burrow had a great debut, but then I don't even know what happened. Like the kicker, it was a
Oh my
30-yard field
gosh.
goal. The kicker misses it and then proceeds to get hurt on the play. Like I feel so bad for Burrow.
I saw that live. I felt so bad. He looked like he threw the game-winning touchdown dot to AJ Green. And I had no fantasy stakes in that. I had AJ Green on my bench in my primary league. I had Mixon, but I mean, it wasn't time for a running back at that point. And Green did push off. I mean, it was the right call because he did fully extend his arm. It happens, but that's just a. And then the kicker missing the field goal. It just a small fantasy tip: don't take kickers from snake bitten franchises. Avoid kickers from the Bengals, the Browns.
Oh, Browns cut their kicker. You heard that?
Wait, just now?
This
When was this?
they guess who they signed?
Who?
Cody Parkey.
Did they actually?
Yeah.
I'm looking. I think they had him a few years ago too. And oh my gosh, they did sign him. Okay, yeah. Good luck, Cleveland. You're gonna need it.
But yeah, what do you think of AJ Green? He had a fairly good game. 9 targets. So he's looking to be Burrow's #1 wide receiver.
Yeah, I think he is Burrow's #1 wide receiver, like you said. 9 targets, and any rookie quarterback is gonna like throwing to AJ Green just because he's really good.
Joe Mixon had a disappointing game. You worried or not?
I'm not as much. I think it was compounded by the fumble, but that's not a huge thing with him. Let me check.
He only had,
He's only had 3 fumbles in his career, and
oh
one of
yeah,
them
he
was
went, I think,
yesterday.
611 snaps without a fumble.
Yeah. So fumbling, I'm not worried about. I'm a little worried about only 1 catch and two targets because I expect him to be a little more involved in the receiving game. I expect his efficiency to go up from just 3.6 yards per carry. I still think he'll get 20 carries in the coming weeks because there's very little competition. And on games maybe where the Bengals passing game is opening up, it'll give Mixon more room to run.
What about the Chargers? I think the main story is Austin Eckler and Josh Kelly, because Eckler kind of disappointed others. He only had one target, and he thrives off the receiving game, and Rivers is gone. So I think this could be a good time to be kind of worried.
Yeah, I would honestly sell Eckler immediately, because I think as it's shown with the Colts, that Eckler getting all those targets in the years was not so much because of the Chargers offense, but just because of Phillip Rivers and his play style tendencies. But now that Rivers is gone, Tyrod Taylor doesn't check running backs in the flat nearly as much as Phillip does. So
and
I was high on Eckler, but
Josh
I would
fairly well in the rushing game. He had the touchdown because he's the bigger back than Eckler, so I think he's gonna get the goal line carries.
I think he will too, and I mean, it looks like it's going to be a 60-40 split between the two of them, apparently. And I wouldn't expect Kelly to be – I expect some regression for Kelly next week, just because 5 yards a carry isn't necessarily sustainable. The Bengals' defense still isn't all that good. But to your point, I think he is still going to get those goal line carries.
Mm-hmm. And he, if you remember on the document, he was one of my sleepers. So, like,
yeah.
Let's go. Buccaneers Saints. Brady, I'm happy. He did not have the greatest game.
Yeah. Oh man. Not a huge Brady fan, I see. And I'm not this is why I was a little wary of Brady just heading into the year, because that Arians offense is tough to learn. Not even for Tom Brady, and especially for these receivers to develop chemistry with their quarterback. It's going to take a bit. I think they'll come on later in the season, but I almost expect Brady at this point to throw 10 or more picks in a 16-game season.
Oh yeah, easily. And then going on the depth chart, rushing, Ronald Jones. It looked like he took over the depth chart, took over as lead back. Fournette had a 1 yard per carry. So, do you think it's over for Fournette or not? Or is that an overreaction?
I'm not. I honestly don't know what to do with Fournette. Maybe if you could try to trade him and get somebody to bite, that would be good. But I wouldn't. Or you might even get more if you just drop him and pick up somebody available, because maybe he'll get more carries as he gets acclimated to the Tampa Bay offense. But Tampa seems to like Ronald Jones more.
Yeah. And then I guess receiving wise, Evans was terrible just because he was injured. But Gronk was terrible out there. He was slow and out of shape, and people had him so high, and it's like I don't think he's it this year.
Like, this is not 2015. This is not 2015 Gronk. Yeah. He's a shell of himself, and it showed out there. One player who really just shone out there was Scotty Miller, who
I was going to talk about
like he's going to be the white 5'9" slot receiver for Tom Brady to throw to, like he did in New England. So
he was tied with Godwin for the most targets. Oh, and guess where he went to school?
Where?
Bowling Green, an obscure college. Brady's favorite mold.
Yeah, so if you're wondering why this S. Miller kept popping up in fantasy, who's getting targets, I would expect that to continue just because of Brady's play style tendencies, shall we say.
And now what do you think about Brady? He had a rough game, to say. Fantasy-wise, do you continue to start him or not? It's against a good team, but what do you think?
I wouldn't panic on Brady. The roster is stacked, and I think he'll get better as the season goes on. He's a guy I could see getting hot down the stretch, and he could be a crucial part in a championship run. Well, obviously both for the Bucs and for fantasy too.
And now on the Saints side, I I think one big story is Michael Thomas, only 3 receptions for 17 yards, and he hurt himself. It was announced it was a high ankle sprain, so that's what Barkley had last year. Are you worried or not?
I'm not worried just because it's Michael Thomas. I think once he gets healthy, like Barkley did late last season, he'll be back to his old self. But it might be you might have to find some ways to fill that void left by an injured Michael Thomas for the next month or month and a half.
It doesn't worry you at all that he was tied for 3rd in targets.
Again, it is just one game, but I would expect those targets to rise just because, I mean, historically he has been Brees' favorite target. I guess the addition of Emmanuel Sanders has hurt that a little bit, but I'd still expect him. I would expect a healthy Michael Thomas to get 8 to 9 targets a game.
Okay.
And I have to talk about Alvin Kamara. I have him in my main league, and it was kind of a roller coaster with him. He was bad on the ground, 12 carries, 16 yards, but
Bucs has the best rushing defense in the league.
They're up there for sure. But Latavius Murray got more carries than him.
Oh.
Latavius Murray wasn't all that effective himself, but he still had more yards per carry. And I thought Kamara scored at the end because I was getting excited because Kamara had just caught a 40-yard bomb off of a trick play from Taysom Hill. They were down at the 2. The Saints were up by 11 at this point. It was 4th and goal from the 2. Less than a minute left. The game was basically over. The Saints run a toss with Kamara, and he outstretched the ball. I thought he scored, and they initially ruled it a touchdown, but they overturned it. And as a fantasy owner, that just hits home. That's brutal.
Yeah, I had him too. He ended up having a great day, but that was just because of his 2 touchdowns, much like Carson.
Yeah, all I could say is, and this is probably going to happen. I'm in the main league that you and I are in. I'm probably going to lose by less than 6 points. So thanks a lot, referees. You just cost me a win.
Second to last game was 49ers Cardinals. Cardinals pulled off the upset, which is quite nice to see. DeAndre Hopkins, he went off 14 catches for 151 yards. He's the connections there.
Yeah, I know when we talked wide receivers, you said you're worried about the workload Hopkins was going to get.
I take that back.
I think that was more due to the fact that the Cardinals never had a true number 1 with Larry getting old. And Kyler, I think, just seemed to love him. I mean, obviously, he threw to him 16 times. And it was and with Kyler too, that was just amazing. I know, like, just looking at his passing stats, he wasn't impressive, but
his
on the ground,
team and rushing.
Yeah, on the ground, he was just brilliant. And keep in mind, this is the Niners defense. It's the best, probably the best defense in the league, top 3. But on a great performance from Kyler, I would expect that to continue. I expect he gets more than 6 yards per attempt next week when he faces off against. I mean, who does he face off against? They play the Washington football team, so he plays a weaker defense, shall we say?
Mm-hmm. George Kittle, he only had 1 reception, but that was because I think it was a knee injury he suffered. But I think he's fine. It was a terrible throw by Garoppolo, and I was worried because I own him in my main league, and I was just worried he was out because that was a nasty injury.
Yeah, that was a little worrying for Kittle there. And, like, also I have to talk about this bandwagon team I'm facing off against in one of my leagues. So he's a guy who drafted, for example, Tom Brady at pick 9, then Mike Evans, which was actually fine, no, not Mike Evans. His team is Tom Brady, Raheem Mostert, J.K. Dobbins, Julian Edelman, Alan Lazard, George Kittle, Ronald Jones, Will Lutz, and the Buccaneers defense. So I was favored to win by 40 this week, and I look like I'm barely going to squeak by.
Mm-hmm.
And Barkley's not doing too hot for me either. This is in the middle of the Giants-Steelers game. So I cannot lose this week.
5 carries for -2 yards.
Yeah. So his team, Raheem Mostert, had 25 points, which shouldn't really have.
Yeah, most
he just broke away from one
pass.
He got almost all that from one breakaway play. And J.K. Dobbins, who was predicted to have less than 4, got 2 goal line carries to score 2 touchdowns. And then Alan Lazard, of course, scored a touchdown. My team had a down week too.
And the last game of that night was the Cowboys-Rams game. That was a really good game to watch, personally.
I mean, I know Cowboys fans are just going to complain about
McCarthy. He screwed up week 1 already.
All right, this looks like the same team that we've seen for about the past 3 to 4 years from Dallas. But anyway, let's talk fantasy.
Zeke, he went off doing Zeke things.
Yeah, he was still probably the safest player in the draft. I'd argue even safer than CMC and Saquon, because Saquon's not doing too well right now.
Yeah. But one player who surprised me was Amari Cooper. His stat line wasn't all too impressive, but he got 14 targets. Like, Dak loves throwing 8-yard passes to him. So, 10 receptions in PPR, he's going to be a good option, I think.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And he's a great fit with Dak in the short to intermediate passing game, whereas Lamb and Gallup are more, not that they can't run routes or anything, but they're more contested catch, deep ball threats. That's their role in the offense.
Mm-hmm.
And Dak was, let me check, he was fine, I guess.
Yeah,
Goff, I thought, played a lot better than his fantasy points would indicate.
And then on the Los Angeles side, I think the biggest surprise was Malcolm Brown. He had 18 carries for 79 yards and 2 touchdowns. McVay said they're going to ride the hot hand, and right now the hot hand is Brown. So, what do you think of that?
Whenever a coach says they're going to ride the hot hand, avoid that backfield at all costs. But I would be a little bit worried about Cam Akers, 14 carries and less than 40 yards. I know I thought he'd bring more value as a receiver. Goff, they even said on the broadcast that Goff said he was the best receiving back he'd ever worked with, and that includes Todd Gurley, but Akers only 1 catch for 4 yards. So.
Mm-hmm. Malcolm Brown had 26 points. So I think he's a great add, because who are the Rams playing next week? Yeah, they're playing the Eagles, I think.
Ooh.
Do the Eagles? Yeah, we can talk about it later, but I think he's a good flex option just in general.
Yeah. Receiving with Woods and Kupp. Yeah, Kupp was a little disappointing. I had him in my main. But I think they are going to kind of oscillate between, 1 week Woods is going to have 100 yards, then it could be Kupp. It does kind of depend on who's hot at that point.
Yeah, what do you think of this? I have both Woods and Kupp in one league.
Having both, I think that's honestly pretty good. It's like having both Bucs receivers, if you had Mike Evans or Chris Godwin last season. They're both viable starting options. I think Woods and Kupp for 2 starting receivers, that's still pretty good.
Yeah. So that's the rest of the games. Thank you for watching or listening.